In this video, we will show you how to replace your front wheel bearing and hub assembly on this Dodge Ram. This will be located behind your front wheel and brakes. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. To remove your wheel, let's start by removing all 5 of our 21mm lug nuts, and then we can remove that wheel. A quick inspection of the hardware as we continue on, replace as necessary. With the wheel out of the way, we're going to have to start disassembling the brakes. To do that, we'll make our way along the back side of the caliper. If you were to look inside of each one of these 2 ports, you're going to find a size 3/8 Allen head slider bolt. Let's remove each of those. That'll just stay right in the caliper. Let's take hold of that caliper. We're going to give it a little wiggle, pull it up and away from the brake rotor. Just a quick inspection of those brake pads. Typically the inner brake pad will stay in the piston. If it slides out, you should be able to slide it right back in. After you've confirmed that you do not see any fluid or damage on the caliper or pads, go ahead and set this aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose. With the caliper set aside, continue on to removing your rotor. If you do have to lightly tap on this with a hammer, you want to make sure you tap along this area, never on the braking surface. A quick inspection and we'll set this aside. With the brake rotor out of the way, let's focus directly in the center here. We're going to start removing the axle nut. For this axle nut, you're going to find you have a locking cotter pin. You can go ahead and remove that and dispose of it properly. With the cotter pin out of the way, we'll be using an 1 11/16 socket to remove our axle nut. Behind that axle nut, you also have a flat washer. Go ahead and remove that. A close inspection of both of these and we'll set them aside. Just going to use a magnet. You can use a pick if necessary. Continuing on, we want to separate the axle from the wheel bearing hub assembly. We'll use a hammer and punch directly in the center, never using the hammer on the axle itself. That can peen it over and cause damage to the axle itself. Once you have movement from here, it's essentially broken free, we'll continue on to separating the wheel bearing from the knuckle. To remove the wheel bearing, we're going to look along the back side of the knuckle here, and you're going to find that you have 3 14mm 12-point mounting bolts. There's 2 that are out in the open along the back side here, one's on the top, but the other one's down on the bottom corner on the front there, essentially forming a triangle. Just have to work this socket into place here. A quick inspection of the mounting hardware as we continue. After you clean it up, make sure it's not rotted and weak. If it is, go ahead and replace it. Let's try to get this upper mounting bolt next. Now as for this upper mounting hardware, you're going to have to go ahead and turn the wheel from one direction or the other, but for now, let's pause on that. We'll leave this one in place, make our way to the third mounting bolt along the front there. There's our third mounting bolt down on the bottom corner here. Now for this one, typically you could slide it all the way out to have a close inspection, which we will get to, but for now, let's go ahead and start it back in. At least 3 to 4 threads here, of course leaving it loose. After that, we're going to continue on to separating the wheel bearing from that steering knuckle. This will be easiest with the vehicle on, and we're going to turn the wheel towards the right. Still plenty of distance here. Now I've got my air ventilation running. We're going to take a socket. I have a short extension on here, and we're going to put it in this area. Continuing from here, we need to go ahead and start up the vehicle, and we're going to turn the wheel as far as we can towards the right. That'll be pushing this area up against the differential tubing and essentially forcing the wheel bearing away from the steering knuckle. Remove that socket. With the wheel bearing broken free, but that mounting bolt still started in there a couple threads, let's make our way over towards that outer tie rod end where it connects to our steering knuckle. You're going to find a cotter pin and a 21mm nut. Remove the pair. After removing that nut, a quick inspection, we're going to start it on a few threads here. Now we'll start separating this. If you plan on reusing your outer tie rod end, you do not want to use a pickle fork. That will cause damage to the boot and potentially the joint. Instead, we'll just continue on using either a hammer or a tie rod end removal tool. If you're using the hammer, just be careful not to cause any damage to the boot or the stud. Once you have that off of there, just a quick inspection and we'll hang this off to the side. Now you can take hold of that steering knuckle and pivot it as necessary to remove the rest of the mounting hardware. As you remove that final mounting bolt for the wheel bearing, just hold on to it so it does not fall down and potentially hurt you. While you continue removing the wheel bearing from the knuckle, be aware of your backing plate. You can remove the wheel bearing from that knuckle and backing plate. There it is, friend. Before you install your brand new wheel bearing, we need to do a little bit more cleaning and inspecting. We'll start with the backing plate. Go ahead and take that off of there. You want to make sure you clean both sides. Make sure it's not rotted and weak in any way. If it looks like it's got rot holes in it, go ahead and replace it with a brand new one. You can use a wire brush for this or some sandpaper if necessary. Let's continue on the mating surface where the backing plate and wheel bearing will sit. We have the 3 ports where our 3 mounting bolts came through from the inboard side towards the outboard side here. We'll make sure that's clean as well. And inside of this area where you can see the axle, we want to make sure that this is a clean mating surface as well. Continue with your wire brush and some parts cleaner if necessary. Now we can install our wheel bearing. Before we do so, let's make sure we have our backing plate in place. When we bring this in, we'll try to align our mounting bolt ports and then start the mounting bolts through from the back side. Let's get the front one. They're all started in. Let's snug them up. The torque for each one of these 3 mounting bolts is 125 foot-pounds. All right, we've torqued all 3 of those mounting bolts. Let's reinstall the outer tie rod end to the steering knuckle. Bring this straight up and through. You can adjust this as necessary. Now that we have that started, let's snug it up and we'll torque it to 60 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued, the next thing we'll do is pay attention to the slot in the mounting nut here. We want to confirm that it's properly aligned with the port, making its way through that tie rod stud. If it's not, continue tightening until the very next slot is. After that, install your cotter pin. We'll add our anti-seize right along the bearing hub here, making our way all the way around. Clean the mating surface on the back side of your rotor, confirming there's no miscellaneous debris. Take a look at that braking surface as well. Now we can install the rotor. Once you have that in position, we'll continue on with our caliper and our brake pad, sliding it right over this position. We'll start in each of our 2 slider pins, snug those up, and torque them to 38 foot-pounds. Let's get our washer on here. Continue on with our axle nut. For the axle nut, we want to make sure that we tighten this with a hand tool, never with an impact tool. You will cause damage to your wheel bearing. When we go to tighten this, you may find that this is going to want to turn on you. To help prevent that from spinning, we can get the vehicle closer to the ground and we'll hold it still with a pry bar directly across these lug studs. Now we're going to torque this axle nut to 175 foot-pounds. Continuing from there, we're going to pay attention to the slots on the axle nut in comparison to the port on the axle shaft there. We need to make sure it's aligned so we can put through our locking cotter pin. If it's not, continue tightening until the very next slot is. Let's see if we can get this through here. Make sure we pin it over. One last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall the wheel. Start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out and then torque them to 115 foot-pounds. Now I've got the wheel back on the ground, preventing it from spinning on me. We'll be torquing each one of these lug nuts to 115 in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. The next thing you need to do is hop in the passenger compartment. Pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.